Hi, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Nancy Wallace-Lobbs, and today I'm going to teach you what every landlord needs to know about security deposits. Now, tenant security deposits can be quite problematic. They are the most very litigious, meaning that of all the complaints received from the Texas Real Estate Commission, problems about tenant disputes in regards to tenant security deposits is right at the top of the list, and they can really suck up some of your time. So what I hope that you get out of this training video is how to document, how to take the security deposit, and how you can cover yourself from the time the tenant moves in until they move out. So what I'm going to be going over and teaching today is what is a security deposit. We're going to talk about the documentation that you need. We're going to talk about bank account info, and then we'll get into refunds and how to handle refunds, especially when there could be charges to the tenant's security deposit. Now, what is a security deposit? So it's a payment required by landlord. I mean, if you're a landlord that's not taking security deposits, you're not a landlord. So you take a security deposit because, number one, it shows intent to move in and care of the property. It ensures a tenant pays rent on time. Now, I'm going to kind of make a little caveat because, as we all know, that doesn't necessarily mean that a tenant does pay on time. But however, it gives you skin, what I like to call skin in the game. And I'm going to talk about how I take security deposits and how I charge and what I charge. So you'll get an idea of how you can set up your management of your properties. And remember, the security deposit always belongs to the tenant until such time that they vacate and you have gone and done a resolution on the security deposit. So it does belong to the tenant. It's not landlord money. It is the tenant's. Now, the documents to use is number one. Now, this is after you've gone through your tenant screening. You've picked the most qualified candidate for your property. So prior to them moving in, you are going to do your own move in. You're going to document the condition of the property. This is really important. Take pictures, take videos, have everything written down so that when the tenant moves in, at the time that you issue keys, you're going to give them a move out condition form. Now, this, the move out condition form, it's a move in, move out condition form, inventory form, if you will. So the tenant is going to get one at the time of move in, and then they have anywhere from 5 to 7 days to return that back to you because they're confirming what the condition of the property is at the time of move in. Then you're going to use that same form when they do a move out, right? And so it's really important to get that form back from the tenant. You're going to put that information into the lease agreement, when it's due. From my other videos, I've talked about the tenant orientation and how I really go over, how important it is. And I just let them know, hey, your security deposit is tied to this form, so I need for you to check everything. And I want them to be detailed too. I'll tell you a story about a tenant that she took videos, she took pictures, and she gave me copies of all of that after they moved in. We required it after 5 days. And when the time came out for them to move out 18 months later, there was a lot of damage. And it turned out that her own video supported that there was not any damage to the property when she took keys and moved in. Then we're going to talk about a pet agreement because there is the security deposit, and then there's a pet deposit if you allow pets. And I'm going to talk about how you can do refundable and non-refundable. And then lastly, we'll talk about how to itemize the security deposit when you're getting ready to return, if there's any deductions that need to be made from the tenant's security deposit. Now, here's a form that I use. I'm like I said, a Texas real estate broker. And this is just one of the forms that we have access to. You could make your own form up. This one, I believe, is about 7 or 8 pages long now. And it goes through every room of the house. And you'll see there's exterior items, there's interior items, there's the condition of the appliances. So we call this the inventory and condition form concerning, and you'd want to write the property address here. And this is what you give to the tenant when they're moving into the property. And then you're going to ask the tenant to make any comments about any part of the property. This is not a repair request. It is, what is the condition of the property? Is there like a little tear in the carpet? Is there a chip in the counter? Maybe the mailbox is missing a flag. And one thing that landlords forget to do, so they've gone through all of this, is at the bottom of the form, this is on the very last page, sometimes landlords forget to collect keys. So I like to document, I actually fill this part in myself. So I'll say, okay, number of door keys I'm issuing. If there's a mailbox key, I'll say how many I'm issuing. Are there security cards? Are there garage door remotes? That's probably one of the top things that don't get returned. Laundry room keys, if you have multifamily or if you have a separate building where you let them do laundry. And then recreational facilities. So a lot of times if my property is in an area that has amenities such as a pool, there'll be a pool card. So in the lease agreement, if I issue a pool card and the tenant doesn't return it, then they get charged $125 for that. So some of these items, like we charge for mailbox keys, because it's just a pain to get the post office to come over there. We do use a locksmith to do that. I don't charge them so much on door keys unless it happens to be a special key for a door, because you do have to rekey in between each tenant. But the garage door remotes, we just tell them that they're going to be charged for that. And then you'll see that the tenant signs it. Okay, so they're signing off that this is the condition of the property. And note, it says this form is not a repair request and that they have to submit the request for repairs separately. So I get this back from the tenant and I throw it in their file for future use when they're at the end of their lease agreement and they're getting ready to move out. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you document security deposits. So this happens to be in page 4 of the residential lease agreement with track. And you'll see, I like to write it this way. So you'll see the security deposit is $2,300, and then I have a /$300 pet deposit. So typically what we do, if the rent on a property, let's say in this case, it's $2,100. So I always charge $200 over the listed lease amount. And why do I do that? So at the end of the lease, I never want a tenant to say, hey, you know what, you can just take the last month's rent, because a security deposit is not rent. It's a deposit that you're going to keep in escrow on behalf of the tenant. So the $2,300 is the security deposit. And a long time ago, we learned that if you make it a different amount, then the tenant can't get confused. So let's say in this case, the rent is $2,100. And they're like, oh, well, I just left, last month's rent. No, you left a security deposit. And then I just go ahead, and there is a pet agreement we're going to go over in a minute, but I do like to put this in the lease that, okay, this is $2,300 security deposit you paid plus the $300 pet deposit. And then notice that I only accept either a cashier's check or electronic payments. We don't take money orders. We don't take personal checks. The security deposit is paid usually when they sign the lease within 24 hours. So sometimes they're putting the deposit down before their actual move-in date. So for example, if they're not moving in until the 1st, but they secure the property with a signed lease agreement, you're going to take the security deposit because that's, again, showing that intent to move in. Now, this is just the Texas property code, and you could actually Google this and just say Texas property code. And I believe it's about, I don't know, maybe 100 pages. It has everything you would ever want to know about being a landlord in Texas. But notice that the first thing, property code provides that a tenant may not withhold payment of any portion of the last month's rent on grounds that the security deposit is security for unpaid rent. You can actually, so let's say you don't, at the end of the lease, you fail to return the deposit, you don't make the itemized deductions, you miss the 30 days. Well, you can actually, this tenant can sue you for actually 3 times the amount of rent. So you'll notice that's kind of a thing. So that's always good to know. If you're watching this out of another state, I'm sure that your state has all kinds of property codes around and rules and regulations around tenant security deposit. So do make sure that you're becoming familiar with what your state requires. Now, the pet agreement is actually a separate document from the lease agreement. It goes kind of hand in hand. So on the pet agreement, we're finding out, we're documenting the type of pets that the person is bringing to the property. And here is where it has the amount that they're going to pay. So on our rentals, what we do is we have a couple ways that we charge security deposits. So if the dog or cat or pet is over a certain weight, we'll charge $500 pet deposit, $300 is refundable, and $200 is non-refundable. So you'll see in section 1 that the tenant had to pay $300. So that's kept in the escrow with the security deposit. And that's why on the lease agreement, I had the 2,300 / 300. And then $200, that just goes to the landlord. So that's money you can keep. If it's a smaller pet, we'll charge, say, like $350 pet deposit, $200 is refundable, and $100 would be non-refundable. So you can put this into the pet agreement, and then it's just documented that, and of course, if they have other pets, you'll charge accordingly. Now, refunds and itemize when less than full amount. So I'm going to just tell you exactly how I handle security deposits. So now, fast forward, the lease term is over, 12, whether it's 12 months, 24 months, or sometimes in my case, 10 years, I have long-term tenants. So you can use this form. I actually do a letter because sometimes when you're itemizing it, there's a lot more things you need to itemize for than just this one-page form. But the gist of it is that you have to say, who it's to, which the tenant is the same. Make sure you don't make the mistake. Even if one tenant, let's say you had roommates and one moved out, you want to make sure that, number one, you don't refund any of the security deposit. You let the new people work that out. So for example, if you had 2 roommates moving into a property, let's say your security deposit was $2,300 and they both paid half of that, then one moves out and they call you up and say, hey, will you refund that half? And you say no, because the security deposit stays with the lease, right? Stays with the property. It doesn't go back to a tenant just because they moved out and they get somebody else in. So the new person that moves in, of course, you can do an amendment to the lease agreement, but make sure that they work out the monies on their own. So when you're doing the lease, and if you do one more step where, let's say the new roommate does pay the deposit, then that should just go to the person who left. But the thing is, what if there's damages, from that tenant that moved out and the other tenant, disputes it? So it can be kind of a headache. So I keep it separate in terms of I don't take new security deposits. And then what I do when I'm itemizing the security deposit is I write the letter to every person that was on the original lease agreement. That way you're covered. You can't have one come back and saying this or that or whatnot. And then the roommate situation, then they can just work it out amongst themselves. And that's worked very well for over 10 years. Hopefully they've given you a forwarding address, but if they haven't, then you're just going to say last known address as and put in that address. And the reason that's important is in Texas, we only have 30 days once they've surrendered the property to actually get a letter out to them, especially if you're taking money away from there, if you're making deductions. So let's say they didn't give you a forwarding address and you're going to be deducting a whole lot of stuff. So what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and prepare the letter and you'll send it to their last known address, which of course is your rental. When it comes back, because what you're going to want to do is send it a certified return receipt, meaning you want someone to sign for that, right? You need to get that little green card back. Once it comes back, do not open the mail. Just do a date stamp, date you received it back to your office, and then, or, your mailing address, and then throw it in the file and leave it there. Because if the tenant ever comes back and says that you did not comply with the 30-day rule, then you can pull that out, show the judge, like let's say the tenant is saying that you never, gave them their security deposit, you never itemized it, then you can, that's proof that you did send that information because it'll have a date stamp on it from when it was mailed through the post office and then when it was returned back to you. Again, the lease concerning the Property Act could be the same address, but if they did give you a forwarding address, that's where this would go. You want to document the move out date, and then you want to document how much security deposit we're talking about. So if the lease said $2,300 slash $300 pet deposit, that's where that goes. So you want to let them know that when you want to let that tenant know, hey, yes, I'm accounting for all of your security deposit, and then you're going to make your deduction. So what I do is I'll write this up in we actually created a template in Word so that we can just pop all this information in rather than just filling out this form, because this form sometimes doesn't cover all of the things that you might be deducting for, like, damaged windows or things like that. Now, let's move on to bank accounts. Now, I'm just going to tell you how I do things, and then you need to talk with your CPA and make sure that you're following the guidelines of being in property management, especially when you're Texas. So number one, the rents and the security deposits are separate bank accounts, and that should always be, because rent is what they're paying for the consideration of being in the property, and that's what their obligation is every month. But the security deposit, remember I said that belongs to the tenant, that needs to go into an escrow account. It can be what we used to do, and some people will say, do it differently, but this is how I ran the property management company. We actually had it was a savings account that was associated with the business checking account. So it's a business checking account, business savings account, and then we just named it escrow, right? Because there's a whole lot of things, like if you have a trust and, LLC, but that's what we did. We had a business bank account that was under our company name, and then we had a business savings account that we just put escrow account in the name of it. And that's how we kept it separate. And you do have to keep separate books, if you will, documenting how much money's there and that kind of thing. Now, you can have an interest-bearing account, and we did. You just need to disclose that in your lease agreement. I know some states require that. In Texas, you don't have to do this. The landlord can completely just put the security deposit in there and, earn interest on it. I mean, you're not getting paid a ton of money here. And it's up to you. Some property, like if you have a property management company, that's what they're doing. They're putting in an interest-bearing account and they're collecting money off of that. I do believe some states require that the landlord pay part of the maybe half of the interest to the tenant. So just check with your state and local property codes to see if that's falls under you. In Texas, it does not. So the way we work with the security deposits is, so let's say I've approved someone, I've written up the lease agreement, I've sent it over to them, and once I've sent it over to them and notified them that they've been approved for a property, they have 24 hours to get that lease signed back to me, ask me any questions. So I need the signed lease agreement and the security deposit. We don't require the pet deposit at the time of signing, but before move-in. But if they pay it, that's fine. If on those times when you have someone, let's say you approved them, the 24 hours happens to be their move-in date. So if you take the rent and the security deposit, so let's say they want to go ahead and pay the first month's rent and the security deposit and the pet deposit, right? Do separate checks. Why? Because remember, you have two different bank accounts. So pet deposits and security deposits go in one account. Remember, your business savings / escrow account. And then the rent goes into your business because that's rent. It's not, security deposits are not rent. So make sure that you're taking two separate checks. So on those times when the tenant is literally moving in, like the next day, and they're bringing their cashier's checks, we require them to have two separate cashier's checks, no exceptions. For an accounting purposes, for audit purposes, for your sanity, they can just go and get two separate ones. And we have had those rare instances, because I tell people, I put in an email, I'm very emphatic about this. If they come to our location to pick up keys and they're bringing that security, that one check, we make them go back to the bank and go get two separate checks. Doesn't happen very often, but occasionally it does. And then do not take cash. Do not take cash. If you do take cash, okay. If you do take cash, because cash is king. Number one, have a witness on both sides. Document, sign it. You can't take pictures of cash, but you need to document the heck out of that. If you're going to take cash, for first month's rent, security deposit, and pet deposit. And I would just highly recommend that you don't do that. Or I guess a tip could be you could meet them at your bank. I just think that's a big hassle, so I wouldn't do it. And definitely don't take credit cards. Why? Because of chargebacks. Doesn't happen very often. And we used to take credit cards for rent and, application fees and all that. Well, we had a person that paid for an application fee of like $80 and in March. Well, in August, we got a notification that, hey, this $80 is being taken out of your bank account. The person's disputing it. So you never want to take credit card payments. I know of someone that actually took credit card payments for rent, and for 6 months their rent was being paid with a credit card, only for the guy to call up and said that his girlfriend had stolen his card and they were fraudulent charges, and the bank went in and it was like $6,000, took all that money from their business account. So don't take cash, don't take credit cards. Now let's talk a little bit about refunds. So there always is a timeline. A landlord even if they've trashed your property, you need to get on the ball and get the security deposit itemization out as soon as you can, but at least within 30 days. And let's just say worst case scenario, there's something that it's just out of your control. You can't get bids. You can't, that's kind of hard to believe that you can't at least get bids on, what it's going to cost, or you could eyeball it. You can put in an estimation there to the letter. But we have sent out letters to the tenant saying, hey, we're going to extend this by 1 week. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Just get your ducks in a row, get the itemization. So if they've trashed their property, then you're talking about, carpet and paint and, maybe holes in the wall. Well, you could just Google that to find out what the average cost in your neighborhood is, and you can just put that in there. Now, you don't have the receipts, right? Because the work actually hasn't been done, but that's okay. Your job is to itemize their security deposit and say, hey, I'm taking these deductions out of here, because they'll have an opportunity to dispute it. You know what I mean? It's the notification from the time, the 30 days, the notification to the tenant has to go out within the 30 days. If you're 31, you just don't want to be there because they could take issue with that, even if you couldn't get bids. But again, you can go in there and you can itemize, okay, it's a 1,500 square foot house. It's going to cost $1 per to paint. It's going to cost $2 for new flooring. You can itemize it. It doesn't have to be exact when you send out the initial letter, if there's going to be a bunch of deductions on their security deposit. Now it's interesting, like on the garage remotes, because we'll say, hey, you're going to get charged $25 or $30, or depending on the type of remote it is. So we'll send a letter out, and they're like, oh, I found the remote. And if they bring it back, I'll give them their $25. I'm okay with that. So that's the first thing, is to make sure you're in the timeline. Now, on deductions. Now, number one, of course, if they haven't paid their rent, that's the first thing that's going to come off. So let's just take that example of $2,300. So let's say the rent was, just for the math's sake, let's just say the rent was $2,100, okay? And they didn't pay the last month's rent. So obviously, you're going to take that $2,100 right off the top, non-payment of rent. So now let's say that they, let's see, what's a good one? Well, holes in the wall are always good, or a broken door. They didn't turn garage remotes. But let's take a biggie. Like, let's say they had their furniture all up against the wall and just left these hideous black marks, not your normal wear and tear, but just, now if they've been there for a good 5 years, yeah, that's going to be normal wear and tear, because it also depends on how long they've been there. So let me give you another example, because people might go, well, if they've been in there for 5 years, you would have to paint anyway. Yes, you would. But let's say that their pet came in, and in our lease agreement, we say that if the pet destroys the yard, like they put holes in the yard, they left doggy doo in the yard, we have charges for that, and they're pretty steep. So, because, if you have a dog that's a digger, or, chews up the fence. So let's just kind of take that example. So you've got the $300 part of this pet deposit. Remember, $200 you already kept. And so you have this $300. So you have a total of $2,600 in this example, $2,300 in security deposit, $300 pet deposit. So number one, they didn't pay rent. Okay, that's 2,100. So now that leaves you with $500, and you have to resod because there's so many holes in the, or fix the yard or whatever. And let's just say that's 300. So now you have two, and now you have to paint. And let's just say that's $1,000. Or name any other kind of repair. I've had tenants break off faucets or something, especially if they're mad. And if they've totally trashed it, let's say it's a $10,000 trash job, you have to haul off trash and everything. Itemize, itemize, itemize. So you want a line. You don't want to say, okay, you destroyed my property, it's $10,000. No, even if you have a contractor that's going to do all the work, you're like, trash haul up is $150. Dog do pickup, $300. Didn't pay last month's rent, $2,100. Excessive amount of holes in the wall. Like when people use molly bolts to hang stuff and they're like huge holes, we do charge if we have to patch them. Itemize, itemize, itemize. Now, remember I said maybe all the work hasn't been done. That's okay. So here's how I do it. So let's talk about the people who leave it in great condition and you don't have to do anything because they're getting all their money back. So I just send them a regular letter saying, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, for being such great tenants. Here's the check number XXX and the amount of 2,600. Thank you. We're, glad that we could, refund all your money. Okay. Send it in regular mail because I've sent them an email that they're getting a full refund. Send it in regular mail. Boom, done. Don't have to do anything. Okay. That's case closed. So now let's talk about the tenant who left it a mess. It's going to take over a month to get it up and ready. So what you're going to do is going to send them a letter, right? Probably within a couple of weeks after they've moved out, once you've assessed everything, maybe a week. And let's say that all the work hasn't been done, but you've got estimates or you've estimated it, right? And that the $2,600 is not even going to come close to covering their repairs. So what you're going to do is you're going to send that itemized letter to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You're not going to say, hey, you were a terrible tenant. You're going to say, due to the condition of the property, the following deductions we'll list, you paid a deposit of $2,300 and $300 pet deposit. Let's list it separately in the letter and say, due to the following items, we will be deducting. And then you just start, carpet repair, painting, non-payment of rent, locks, garage remotes missing. You can't charge them for locks, broken window. If your list is 10 pages long, make it 10 pages long. Make it as itemized with the amount. So you got to have what the repair item is, what you're deducting for, and the amount. You sign that and you send it certified, registered, certified return receipt. Okay, that's what you need because you want to have proof that you did mail that letter within the 30 days. So here's what normally happens. So sometimes the tenants will take issue with what you've done. So let's just take those tenants that, they know they didn't pay rent. They know they're not going to get any deposit back. So you never hear from them. But let's talk about those tenants. And this actually happened to me, some real life story. I had some tenants in the house for 5 years. So there was normal wear and tear. We expected to paint and we had to replace the carpet. But then there was like a huge amount of trash that they left behind. They broke every blind in the property. There was a busted window. There was a door off of the closet tracks. So these were definite tenant damages, right? So what did I do? And they were getting a partial refund because this works when they're getting no refund and a partial. So because of the time frame, I got the letter out in the 30 days. Okay, this is what it's going to cost. This is what I'm going to deduct. So they called me, right? So the first call is, hey, we don't agree with what you're saying. I'm like, great. Let me send you my pictures I took and my invoices, because by this time you should have some invoices or something written that says don't make it from you, but something from a contractor that says it's going to cost $130 to replace a window. It's going to cost $200 to replace all the blinds. I don't do high-end blinds. Anyway, and you make a packet and you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to put all that together. And this is where it becomes time consuming. So I made a packet. I gave them a copy of the original move-in form from before, the condition of the property that I had documented before they moved into the property. Then I gave them a copy of their move-in condition form that they provided, right? And there was no broken blinds. Then I had pictures of before and I had pictures of the move out. So I had already documented the condition of the property and now I have documentation of how they left it. I put that in a nice 8.5 by 11, and I did another letter, right, of saying, okay, I have enclosed, the original move-in, your original move-in, dated whatever date it was. Remember my date stamp I'm always talking about? Well, I date stamp those move-in condition forms when the tenant brings them back in. So I document, and then I send that 8.5, 11 package out, return receipt, caught the postage a little bit more, but you'll be glad you did this. And here's why. So they get that and they still didn't agree with the deductions. So they wanted to come in and meet with me, which, you know what, I was fine. This normally doesn't take this long because usually when you tell them something, they might think that it's too costly for, the replacement of blinds or whatever it is. But anyway, they did come into the office. And, sometimes you just need to make tenants go away, right? Because who has time to dicker over $200? So what we did is we went through line by line, and I had my invoices from my contractor saying, okay, well, this is what they charge, So what I ended up doing was on a couple of items that they just were having, heartache over. I said, you know what? Let me do this. Let me just split the cost with you. I'll take part of the hit, but you have to take part of the hit too. And I went back to the office and I just wrote them out a check for, I think it was a couple $100 for them to go away. Right. So sometimes it's just about, I don't want to, you can kind of tell somebody's getting heated and they're going to try and sue you. And, nobody has time for that. So sometimes you have to kind of go, okay, well, I'm going to give a little here, but you're going to give a little bit here. Now, if it's just blatant, like they've just completely trashed your property, do not do that. Right. This is in those times when sometimes it's a partial refund. And, maybe the tenant, okay, just to make them go away, because who has time to, keep meeting with tenants that have already moved out. So the notifications, I want you to make sure you're sending it. Now, if you're giving a full refund, just put it in the regular mail. Okay, email them, hey, I'm sending a check out today. You're getting a full refund of your security deposit and pet deposit. Thank you for being a great tenant. Good luck in your new home. Goes out in the mail. And you don't have to worry about that. Now, if something happens and the mail doesn't get delivered, well, that's another story, but that doesn't happen very often. And they're on the lookout for it too. So if it's anything that has to do with deductions, even if you're deducting $50, please send a certified return receipt to the last known address. So hopefully they've given you a forwarding address, but if they haven't, make sure that you send it to the address of your rental property because that's the last known address. When it comes back as non-deliverable, even if it's to the new address, if it comes back non-deliverable, don't open it, date stamp it when you received it back and throw it in their file and that's your documentation for going forward. And lastly, do not open that letter. Okay, don't open the letter. So I just want to thank you for watching. If you do have any questions about property management, I would be happy to talk with you. Like I said, I've been in property management for a really long time. I do have an online course that teaches landlords how to be better property managers. And if that's something you might be interested in, then email me and we can talk about that because I normally have some kind of special going on. So anyway, thanks again for watching. I hope you found this was useful. Give me a like and share the video. Thanks a lot and happy investing. Thank you.